Hi, and welcome to the Naturalists podcast. I'm C. McKeon.
I'm Anthony Porter.
And I'm Lev Frid.
And we are going to be discussing what is going on in the natural world outside of your front door and around the globe. Welcome back to the Naturalist podcast. Today, I've got co-host Anthony with me. Hi, Anthony.
How's it going, C?
Pretty good. And we have a special guest coming to us from Peru, Chris Ketola.
Hey guys, good to be here.
Chris, what are you doing in Peru, and what's going on outside of your front door?
Well, right now it's actually surprisingly quiet for Cusco. For any of your listeners who might have probably have been at some point, maybe to South America, maybe they've been lucky enough to come to Cusco. It's usually a pretty hectic place, a lot of tourists, pretty active, especially when it gets dark out, like it is now. Things are a little different here right now. It's a lot quieter than normal. I've been here in Cusco since mid-April, actually. Unfortunately, haven't been in the jungle since then. And been confined to this house I'm in, this lovely house, but this house for most of that time. And actually, I've only been out to the Plaza de Armas, the main square, once. And when I did go, it was basically empty, and people were staring at me very strangely. Which, for anybody who's been to Cusco, it's usually the opposite. Usually, when they see someone who looks like a tourist, they're very excited to try to sell them something. It's quite different here at this time. So, I mean, I hope. Even though it can be a little bit annoying when people approach you all the time, I hope that happens again in the future, because that'll be a sign that things have returned to some semblance of normalcy. But so that's kind of where I'm at and what I'm doing right now.
So Cusco's up at the top of the Andes, right?
Yeah, it's got a slope to the city, so it depends where you are in it a bit, but it's about 3,500 meters in Cusco. So yeah, it's when people hear you're in South America, they always assume, oh, you walk around in shorts and you're so hot, and not quite. Cusco is very different. It's and that's one of the great things about Peru. It's just how different it is. You go to the coast in Lima and the ocean. You go down to Paracas, you get a desert, and you get the top of the Andes, some of the highest mountains in the world. And then you go a little farther east, and you get into the lowland Amazon rainforest, where I'm used to being. So it's an amazing country in that way. And yeah, if you're in Cusco, it's definitely high, and as I said, quite cool.
How did you end up living your life in Peru?
Yeah, it's actually, it's kind of an interesting story, kind of a lucky story in a way. I mean, my life kind of took a bit of a complete turn about 5 years ago. I used to work with captive animals, actually, with birds of prey and bats, doing educational work a lot, and captive breeding programs, and wildlife rehabilitation. And not going to get into this story here, but some things changed. That kind of just stopped very abruptly. And that gave you the chance, I guess, finding a positive out of something that was a little bit negative. Gave me the chance to travel, and I hadn't actually gotten a chance to do any field work in the actual rainforest. And there's a lot of opportunities to do field work and volunteer at different organizations, and some of them seem to me to be a little bit superficial, not too not really the kind of thing that your hands really dirty. And I kind of just got lucky enough to find the organization I'm working for now, which is Fauna Forever. And it seemed like what I wanted. And yeah, I got off the plane, and the next day in the jungle, it certainly was. It was super hot, and we were setting up mist nets and getting attacked by bugs and everything I wanted, actually. And it's one of those things. I wasn't here that long, but I guess you could say I made a good impression with my experience working with animals. There wasn't any, I really didn't have to be trained how to work with them. It was just a case of just jumping right in. And I was contacted by my boss, like the day I got back to Canada, actually, and about coming back and working with us on projects. And a few months later, I was back, and I've been here now for 2 years, actually, working with the organization. So I guess it shows you the power of being able to get out there and volunteer to make a good impression. Sometimes it leads to something. So I guess in my case, it did. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty neat story. I like that.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm very happy how it turned out, for sure.
So what do you do?
Do you find a lot of your educational background work with your animals helps currently?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was talking to someone last night who's still working with raptors and falconry. We had a long conversation, because I miss that a lot, the hands-on working with birds every day. It's very different, this type of work versus that. The actual work is extremely different, but what I would say is my experience with education helps when I'm trying to explain what we're doing to people, I would say generally. And it also, my comfort level handling animals is, I mean, I've been doing it since I was a kid. My family kind of founded the organization I work for. So I think my earliest memory of being around a hawk was I was about 4 years old, and I remember feeding baby owls when I was 6. And the first hawk that ever flew to my glove, I think I was like 10 years old. So I'm pretty experienced handling wild animals of all sizes and shapes. So that's definitely very helpful for me. There's nothing that really, I'm cautious to be careful, especially when you're handling like a venomous, snake or something. But I'm not really scared or fearful of working with animals. So that's definitely a huge asset for the work I'm doing in the field for sure.
And
Absolutely.
what are you doing?
Yeah, so I mean, Fauna Forever is a relatively small NGO, not so much in terms of the area we're working in, but not in terms of the amount of years it's been operational. Fauna Forever has been working for about 15 years in the Madre de Dios region of Peru. And we've covered, well, myself and personally, I think I've worked at 6 different sites already, but we've covered close to 50 sites in this whole region. But in terms of staff, in terms of the budget, all of our budget goes into the field work. So we don't have a huge permanent staff. So because of that, people such as myself who can sort of jump around to a different taxa are quite valuable. So I usually coordinate the herpetological research. So of course, I was working with reptiles, amphibians. I also the first year I was here, I was helping a lot with the bird research, and now basically I've sort of taken that on as well into my sort of portfolio. And then also at times when we're conducting research and monitoring of bats, I also oversee that. So sort of juggling a lot. My days are often depending on the schedule we're running and what projects we're doing and what volunteers and interns we have working with us. My days are often waking up at 4:30 and then working till maybe noon, and then a little nap, and then a night shift from like 6 p.m. until 11 p.m. So it's long days, but it's very interesting work, obviously.
Wow. That's one of my favorite parts of the world, right? Is the Madre de Dios and the Manu region in particular.
Yeah.
And
it's an incredibly diverse area, and it's one of those things that for me personally, I guess there's 2 things that are very exciting about it. One is the diversity. I mean, the biodiversity is just, it's amazing, and it doesn't matter what taxa you're talking about, it's just spectacular. And I've been here now 2 years, and I've been lucky to see a lot of different animals of all different shapes and sizes and different groups, but there's still so much out there I know that I haven't seen personally, and I'm sort of like, it's actually funny, I've been going over some species lists recently and just realizing like, wow, I still haven't seen that, I haven't seen that. And it's amazing after thousands of hours now in the field, and there's still things you can't see. And I mean, I know as personally, you can take a boat a few hours north or east or west, and suddenly there just seems to be this whole new group of species. It's amazing. And I think for me too, also, I mean, for any researchers down here, what's really exciting is, I mean, it's frustrating, but also exciting is how little we know. There's times that it's really frustrating because you're like, God, how do we not know this? Because in North America, Canada or America, we would just know so much about every species normally. And down here, there's times just like, I can't believe we don't know that. But it's also exciting because it's like, wow, we could learn that. We can do that. That's a project we can undertake and learn that. So it's simultaneously frustrating and inspiring at the same time, so to speak.
So what is on your wish list? Like, you say that there are things that you haven't seen. I'm curious to hear much about what you have seen, but what's still out there for you?
Got to think off the top of my head. I mean, for me, one of the biggest things from the herpetology world is actually trying to finally see a Sicilian. Surprisingly enough, I've not run into Sicilians, and it's I mean, I know they're hard to see, but 2 years of being out in the rainy season, you'd think you'd run across one, but no. And it's so frustrating because people in the city of Puerto Maldonado, they see them all the time because they actually get flooded in the city in the sewage pipes, as gross as that may sound.
Wow.
Surprisingly, they're actually able to live in that area and they're seen, but no, we haven't gotten lucky enough to see them yet. Recently, I checked just the last couple of weeks I was in the jungle. I checked the big one off my personal list, which was the Cruzio hyla craspidopus, the fringed leaf frog, which is just a stunning frog. So I've seen, so I've seen like pretty much all of the large tree frogs, the Phalameducinae now, except for the terrestrial species. So I'm really getting nerdy and specific here, but the one terrestrial species I haven't seen yet. Surprisingly enough, I haven't seen a boa constrictor, which is really surprising when you think about being down here. You think of seeing them right away, but the region we happen to be in just don't seem to have a lot of long-tailed hippopoda. But we just so far I've not encountered one. I mean, that would be really good. Bird-wise, I've done pretty good. I finally saw a harp eagle just at the end of 2019. I'd like to get a better view, but finally did see one. That's good.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, there's definitely still, it comes down for me to a lot of very niche species and niche groups that I haven't seen, but a lot of the big ones I've gotten to see. But it seems to come in spurts. There's when I first got here, within a month, I saw 2 jaguars on the river, and that was like always really exciting thing to see. It's not like the Pantanal where you can see them everywhere. Most of the world seeing a jaguar is, not in a trap camera, but actually with your own eyes is really exciting. And this region is no different. And actually got to see the 2, and you just get these bursts of good luck, and then you go for like a year where it's kind of like you're seeing the same things, and then suddenly they all cluster up together again. So hopefully when I go back, I'll be rewarded with some good luck again and see some new things.
There we go. Yeah. So you said it's been since April, right?
Yeah, so it's about mid-April is when we had to come out, unfortunately. Yeah.
So what season would have it been that you left?
So yeah, we left at the very end, I wouldn't say the very end, but at the last period of the rainy season.
Okay.
Normally the dry season would kick in. I mean, it depends a bit, but the dry season usually would be classified as about June until somewhere in the last week of October, first week of November or so. So it was just kind of the end of the rainy season for us. We had to leave because of all of our volunteers and interns left. And then when they're gone, to be honest, it is difficult to keep camp open financially. And then the other risk is that we weren't sure about actually getting supplies out into the jungle. And actually for the first couple months after we left, that city, Puerto Maldonado, was not bad with COVID. It had very few cases. But sadly, in the last month, the cases have actually really shot up. And there's now, the last I had heard, was well over 2,000 cases, which is it's a small city. Puerto Maldonado is not 1 million people. So when you hear of over 2,000 cases, and you consider that the testing is low, that's a very high number. So it was a good decision that we came out, even though it's been kind of frustrating not being there. Although the time being away has been good for us because it's given us a chance to actually sort of dig into 15 years of data on birds and mammals. And I haven't even gotten a chance to look into the herpetological data, to be honest. I've been so busy with the bird data, and my boss has been so busy with the mammal data. But there has been some pretty interesting results so far, and we're hoping to be able to get some of those results published in the next few months. So yeah, there's a positive out of that negative.
Well, that's good at least. So many of our listeners have never had the opportunity to get to the Amazon. And I know that where you're at, like you were describing Cusco as being quite high, the Amazon itself and the basin is quite low. And you're in a special place where you can make that transition, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if you don't mind describing what is getting to the Amazon like for you, and how would someone perceive that coming from North America?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on literally how do you get there, right? I mean, there's a couple ways. I think for a lot of tourists and a lot of people may be coming to visit for recreation, maybe hopefully in the future. It depends, I guess, on your budget. If you're going to fly straight in, you just land in the airport, and suddenly when you step out of the plane, you're just hit by a wall of just humidity and heat. It's overwhelming. If you come from Cusco, which a lot of tourists will choose to do, they'll take a private car or a bus, which is, depending on the season, actually quite safe. The rainy season, it's a little sketchy, but outside of the rainy season, it's actually quite safe. I've done it many times. And it's only about a 10-hour bus ride, which, for Latin America isn't that bad. If you happen to take a bus ride or a car, it's actually very interesting because, you come from Cusco and then you actually have to go up very high. You end up going up to about 4,800 meters. It's so high there that I actually got stuck in a snowstorm last year. Now, when I say snowstorm, it's not what we might think of in North America. We're talking about 1 inch of snow but 1 inch of snow was enough to stop the bus for 8 hours because it couldn't move in that snow. It was hilarious.
Wow.
But yeah, you go right to the peak and it's super high. And if you've never been up high, if you're not used to, like yourself, Anthony, being Colorado, it wouldn't bother you, the altitude probably. But if you're not used to the altitude, it can be a little queasy up there that high. And then suddenly you go down extremely winding S curves. And you're going down into the like you're going down through the cloud forest of the Andes and then into the foothills, and then suddenly it's quite amazing. You suddenly hit a very flat portion. It's like you're just done, and then it's just a straight flat road with what I'll explain this in a minute, but what used to be jungle on either side as you make the very long drive into Puerto Maldonado, which is the closest large city to where the majority of field work is done in this area. Almost all the field work in the, I guess you could say, the southeastern part of Madre de Dios is based to some extent out of Puerto Maldonado. So basically, when we hear this region, we hear of like Tambopata, Las Piedras, and then of course we hear of a Manu a lot. If you're doing Manu, it's kind of a different base you'd work from. But if you're working anywhere in Tambopata or Las Piedras region, you're usually, most of your supplies are coming from that city of Puerto Maldonado. Now I mentioned that if you're taking that car ride, it used to be pristine jungle you would see on the way into Puerto Maldonado. Unfortunately, people are probably not surprised to hear it's not all pristine anymore. Seeing farmland is sad, and it's certainly not something a lot of people would want to see, but it's certainly less destructive than the other thing you will often see, especially when you first come out of the Andes. You actually reach an area where there's been an incredible amount of damage from gold mining. And I got to admit, it's a very harsh thing to see if you've never seen it and you're not prepared for it. You see what would have been lush rainforest of trees about 40 meters high is now looks like a swampy desert, if that makes sense, because it's flat, it's sandy, it's ripped up, shrubby vegetation in some areas, like really gross looking pools of water. The tailing ponds are left in some areas. It's something where, if you're coming as a tourist to see pretty things, maybe you don't want to see it. But if you're coming as a tourist to understand what's happening in the area, it is very valuable to see it, even though it's actually really sad. You can see these things from satellite images, and when you drive through it, it's almost hard to comprehend the actual what it truly looks like when you drive through it.
I'm always amazed by the boats, right? There's, at least as I remember them, they're kind of elaborated dugouts, like 40 feet long. They're really, they're big.
Yeah, there's kind of two classes to the boats. There is the long ones, which you mentioned, and those are usually used for tourists. And actually, thankfully for Fauna Forever, we have one of those larger, longer boats. The advantage to them, of course, is that they carry a lot of people, they carry a lot of supplies. And I'll be honest too, for myself, when I'm going out doing caiman research, we have to catch the caimans in the boat, and the boat, thankfully, is very stable. So it's very low as well. So it's actually a really nice boat for catching caimans. I love it. But there are smaller, shorter versions of that type of boat. So imagine a boat that it looks like a banana that's been cut in half, sort of, and has like a roof over part of it. That's kind of what they look like. And imagine, a big long one is very stable, but a short one is very unstable. And I've been in those a few times. I've been in one. It's a very long story, which I don't know if I really go into particularly, but let's just say I was in one at night without lights, and it was not the safest situation I've ever been in. So I vowed that time I'll never get myself into a boat again without having my own light, just in case the driver forgets, which he did that night.
Yeah, that's super neat. Chris, I know we could probably talk about the deforestation part of it all day. I was looking at different kinds, like whether you're talking about like the Congo, like Borneo, or the Amazon, having lowland forests separated from like the highland, and like it's weird, like, to say the word lucky, but to feel lucky to know that there's mountainous parts that can be very hard to develop, and that's what's really safe a lot of these areas. I've noticed that just across the side, and so I'm curious what you've seen. It sounds like what you talked about was as soon as you hit the mountain, like when you go up, then it's kind of more of a
yeah, I mean, that it's true to some extent. I mean, I would say there are areas in the Andes, and probably any mountain range in the world. I haven't been lucky enough to visit other mountain ranges in Africa or Asia, but I'm sure there are areas where the slope is such that it just isn't really, you cannot farm there, right? But I will say, I guess it's a testament to the ingenuity of humans, that slope has to be very steep. And unfortunately, if the slope is not extremely steep, there is actually a significant amount of damage that can occur. Now, it is very regional. I would say in Madre de Dios, this exact region, which like Madre de Dios extends up to the Cusco region, and that dividing line is somewhere, in the Andes. But there's a pretty significant amount of the eastern slope of the Andes in this region that does fall into the Madre de Dios region. So, if you're thinking about that interoceanic highway, like I was describing, the amount of damage as you go into the Andes there is, I wouldn't call it too extreme, but there are certain areas in Peru and Ecuador and Colombia where the damage on these slopes and these mountainous areas is actually very extreme, like just catastrophic. And then when you go higher, sort of above, like into the cloud forest and above, that becomes really good habitat for growing coffee. And the problem is, historically, coffee, you can grow coffee, you can do shade-grown coffee, which, I'm sure you could access papers and get exact numbers, but basically you retain 80 to 90% of the biodiversity if you grow coffee in shade. It's like shade-grown coffee is a very positive thing comparative to non-shade-grown coffee. Large-scale coffee plantations are just devastating. They just basically wipe out 90, 95% of the biodiversity. And there is quite a bit of that in Peru. I would say there's a lot more of it in other countries. And I mean, my God, a country like El Salvador is pretty much destroyed by it. But I wouldn't necessarily say that the Andes are protected because of their altitude. And I mean, one of the things that's really surprising, I think, to most people when they go to the area that I'm in now, Cusco, a lot of people go to Machu Picchu in the Sacred Valley, and they see it. And as they're driving or hiking, they look up on the mountainside, and it's like just grass and rocks, and they probably assume that that's natural. And there are areas, they're high enough in altitude that is natural, of course. But there are a lot of areas that historically, going back to the Incas, like we're talking thousands of years, that have been destroyed. There's the polylepsis trees, which are many species of them, but they're the sort of native tree in the Andes. They take, you can have a polylepsis tree that is like 5 feet tall, and it could be 150 years old. And it's amazing. You think it's like a little new shrub, and it's hundreds of years old. And the amount of species that are, only found in these regions is just breathtaking. It's insane, and it obviously it occurs with birds and mammals. But I would argue that with herpetology, like frogs especially, it's extremely common to have every one of these valleys have a species only found there. It's just mind-boggling. And a lot of this habitat has been destroyed historically, and it still, to some extent, does get destroyed. And one of the big problems in the Andes actually is actually forest fires, which people would be kind of surprised at. But you get a lot of farmers who are trying to control burn a small plot they own. But I mean, they don't have high technology. They don't have fire. They don't have any way to put it out. So the wind hits it and it takes over, and it actually burns down a big area of primary forest that they never intended to, and they don't own, but they can't control it. So unfortunately, I wouldn't say there's any area that is particularly immune to the pressures of humans. I mean, even in speaking of Peru specifically, in the desert that's south of Lima in Caracas, it's a very, very unique ecosystem. And just right now, they're talking about potentially storing a whole bunch of potentially harmful metals in this national reserve. It's like they're potentially going to give companies permission to store them down there. And I really hope that that's stopped. But I guess it shows you the march of progress with, if you want to use that in italics, of humanity doesn't really have a lot of limitations, sadly, unfortunately.
Anthony, question for you: when you're in Highland, Colorado, what is it that stops humans there, if anything, right?
Yeah, it's hard because a lot of the areas in Colorado, the places that are more arid are going to be less affluent. So the places that are pretty desirable are going to be people that want to build their houses into the hillside. I think I was in Telluride, which is like a pretty nice area in the forested spots, really geothermal, active area. I think Oprah has a house down there. A lot of private development, not a lot of commercial stuff. I was telling you, a couple weeks ago, I was trying to find this cave because there is this part in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where there's a mining site that's proposed to expand about tenfold the size that it is now. And the reason why it's currently on hold is because this guy's like, you know what, I I know there's something here that's worth saving. And he just trekked around this area for days. And then he found this like old cave that had a lot of anthropological significance to it. And so they sent it into the USGS. And so that's been a lot of the conservation. But yeah, mining's huge. Getting God, what's it called? I can't remember the mineral that they're using up here. But yeah, huge mining stuff. But other than that, yeah, it's more like private housing, which, I mean, it's not the worst, because I mean, if you own 10 acres up there for a status symbol, like, you're not going to use 10 acres. You're going to be there a month out of the year, but it is still detrimental. Yeah, I would say not a lot of commercial stuff. If anything, mining every once in a while, but mainly just big old houses.
As I recall, your search for that cave involved like a rope, a grappling hook.
Yeah, I searched for about 7 hours on this landside, and I this was before I bought any rappelling gear. This was like a month ago, but since then I just bought a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go out today. I'm just gonna go hiking and look for the giant hole in the ground. And yeah, I had a climbing grade grappling hook, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but I had that, and there's like some a length of like 50 feet of rope that I just tied around my waist, and I just brought my supplies for the day and tried to trek around to find some stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's still like, it's the adventure. It's not about finding the spot, but I did contact the guy that found the cave. I'm like, listen, like, you've left breadcrumbs all over the internet. You haven't told anybody where it is. Like, tell me where it is, please. And he's like, he just sent me back like, good luck. All right, cool.
Well, so, that kind of makes it more fun anyways.
It is so much more fun that way. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I'm dealing with now. But yeah, stuff like that, like finding small things to save a big plot of land. That's been huge. And I saw Expedition Unknown. That dude, Josh Gates, is my freaking spirit animal. But looking at him, and he had some co-hosts that went down to Indonesia, and there was an entire area proposed for clear cutting. And they ended up trying to go around to find caves that had cultural significance and any kind of tribal significance. And they found these caves with petroglyphs that were like 40,000 years old.
Wow.
When I can remember, that might be off. But yeah, because of that, they sent in proposals to the government, and they had these areas blocked off. And yeah, I was actually curious, Chris, if you had any experience knowing the kind of the cultural or that side of it, and preservation and conservation of that area.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I'll preface anything I say by saying, that's not my anthropology is interesting, right, but it's not my background. However, I mean, having said that, you work down here, you get to know people, and hear stories and learn about the area. What I would say is, unfortunately, this region, a lot of its history that is recorded starts with the rubber trade, which is Europeans and North Americans coming in, and it was the first, I guess, one of the earliest, not the first, but one of the earliest, mass exploitations of the rainforest, I guess. That's why there's a lot of communities here that have American names. Like there's a port that is Philadelphia. There's San Francisco. There's Baltimore. There's Los Angeles. And people always wonder, like, that makes no sense. We're in Peru. Why? And the reason is that is the port where the product would be shipped to. So they kind of took these areas over. A lot of the native people were basically either killed or forced into slave labor to be used to harvest the rubber. So it's pretty sad. It's pretty tragic. I hate to say it, not to bring the mood down, but it's true. But that a lot of the history of the area was lost in that way. So there are it's really an interesting dynamic, because north of Puerto Maldonado, if you go to the northern edge of Madre de Dios and then over the border in Brazil, it's actually the largest population of uncontacted humans in the entire world. It's really crazy. And I mean, I have not been up there yet, because it's very difficult and actually dangerous, and you need special permits to go that far north. But my boss has actually been up there a few times, and he has encountered uncontacted people with his research teams in the past. And yet, if you go down south of that, a lot of that sort of culture has been either completely lost or heavily damaged, I guess, by the influence of Westerners, Europeans and Westerners. But I mean, there are some, there still are some communities that retain a lot of their history. Some of their history involves escaping the rubber trade, believe it or not. There's one community that we work with called Boca Paramanu, and we have students come there quite often. It's one of the things we do is often take students, to teach them what we do for research, but also teach them about the community. And they often tell, they tell the story about how that community actually settled, and that the history of that community is actually much farther north, much farther north. But they actually were basically, hunted by another community, because that community had no choice but to hunt them, because they were being hunted by the rubber trade. This is just like a cascade effect. And they ended up just going farther south and farther south, escaping being attacked, this particular community, until they finally found this river. They couldn't go any farther south, and they just ended up sort of settling there about 100 years ago. So I mean, that's kind of an example. So that's probably close to Puerto Maldonado, like within a close proximity. That's one of the most, I guess, one of the communities with the biggest link to their past. If you go farther out into the more remote areas, you'll get some more communities that have more connection to their sort of past. But yeah, a lot of that traditional kind of really ancient kind of history is lost. And of course, I mean, from an archaeological perspective, this environment, I don't think, again, I'm not an archaeologist, but this is not a great environment for storing artifacts and finding things in great shape. But what I will say is, the ability for the local people to survive in the jungle. I mean, there's kind of two classes of people in this area. And again, I don't want to get too classy, but you know what I mean? There's kind of people who live in the city and they don't leave the city. But then there are the people who live, even though they go into the city, they may have even a home in the city, they still spend a lot of time in the jungle, and they know it very well. And those people, it's just passed down. You can tell, even though they may not know the direct history of their people the same way, because it may have been lost, the skills there, the knowledge of the jungle, the ability to spot animals, to make things, to figure out how to deal with a boat in the middle of nowhere. It's just amazing. It boggles the mind. And that's why most researchers will tell you, the best trackers, the best spotters are local people. It's just, I mean, there's one person we work with in particular, his name is Cheeky, and he's a legend in Tambopata. He is literally a legend. Like, he's something you would think is like a cartoon, but he's so good and so legendary. And he's the kind of he'll be out in the middle of the depths of the Tambopata Reserve with rangers who are there monitoring for poaching. And then like 3 days later, he'll be in the city of Puerto Maldonado, and he's just holding court in the city because everybody just knows him. He's legendary. So it's just, yeah. And I mean, they start at a young age. It's so incredible. You can see it because the kids are just out there doing things that North American children would never be allowed to do at a very young age. But it's really cool. I mean, it's really interesting when you can see these people and work with them and get to know them too. And yeah, it's one of the things I thought I wanted to sort of mention about, when I talk about mining and deforestation, is that, I think it's really important that everybody who sees bad things happening, in the Amazon or in Asia or Africa, anywhere, or I mean, anywhere in the world, to understand that a lot of the people who might be cutting forests down for farms or whatever the case may be, and even sometimes for gold mining, which is sort of a different subject, but a lot of the people doing the actual work, the actual person, with a chainsaw in their hand, they're not bad people. They're not evil people. They're not doing it because they're greedy. Often they're doing it because they simply have no choice. And if you had a family to feed, and you had a choice between starving or cutting, part of your property down to feed them, everybody would make that choice. So it's very important that, Westerners, so to speak, people living in North America, Europe, whatever, who have resources that people here may not, take the time to understand why it's occurring, and don't just judge people automatically. I think gold mining is a little different in that a lot of the people who are, like at the top end of gold mining, like the managers of it, they are getting rich. They're exploiting, and they're making really terrible choices for the people working under them and for the environment. But even in gold mining, a lot of the people actually, on a river digging for that gold that day, they're poor. They don't have a lot of money. They're poor. And I mean, I know people personally who have, since this pandemic started, have gone back to doing some mining, and they were doing ecotourism. I mean, obviously not going to name any names, but they would have been a guide for a tourist this summer. But because of the pandemic, and they have zero income and their families are starving, they've had no choice but to go back to some of the gold mining. So I do think it's really important, not to get too, we can go down this path, but I think it's really important for people to take a moment, step back, and not judge people from afar without kind of understanding the motivation of why they're doing it, and what's causing them to do it. That's one thing I learned pretty quickly being down here. Is these people are generally very good people, and they care about the environment, but they sometimes have no choice but to feed their families.
When I first started working in that region a long time ago, like several decades ago now, crazy. The group of people I was with were really into canopy climbing, right? So getting up into the canopy of big trees and using the climbing gear to do it. And there was one point where a bunch of us were, like Jumaring up into a tree, and just shocked and amazed by into one of these canopy emergence. So this tree like actually pops out above the rest of the canopy. Yeah. It's kind of cool. Like this island in the sky. And then the next thing we know, we look over into the like next tree over, and there's one of the local guys who's been helping us out, who just free climbed up on a liana, just like.
Yes. Yeah, it's crazy.
In fact, I remember once the lead, like you use a series of ropes to pull one rope after the next up into the canopy, so then you have something large enough to climb. And our lead rope got tangled somewhere up there, and this guy he's like, oh, what's happening? It's stuck. And he just scampers up there like it's nothing, like drops our lead rope over the limb that we're trying to get to. He's like, okay, now you can do whatever childish thing that you're doing. Go ahead. Yes.
Oh yeah. It's unbelievable. I mean, there's so many things that I would like us to do in the future, and hopefully we will. And obviously budget's usually what restricts everything. But so I haven't had a chance to do a lot of tree climbing yet. That's something we really want to do. But one thing, the stories that I can remember, just every time there's something to do with a boat and the river going up and down, it is just, I mean, that's one thing that people would have trouble. I mean, okay, so anyone who's lived near any type of large river in North America knows that they can go up and down. I mean, that's unfortunately, sadly, why there's flooding. But it's usually a certain time of the year, and it's usually like a big event, and then it drops. And after that, there's just maybe a couple feet here and there up and down when it rains heavy. But boy, in the rainforest, it is just a constant thing. I mean, you're talking about 5 meters up and down is common in one day. In hours, it can go from like, oh, no problem at all. And then you walk down to the boat and you're like, oh my God, it's gone up so much. And it's a huge challenge. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons that is, but basically, the boat could get lost, it could get sunk, it could get beached, it's constant. And absolutely, boats get beached all the time. And it's just hilarious how they deal with it. I mean, they just literally, there's like just a bunch of trees. They always have like some relatively short, maybe 15 meter tall, maybe 20 top meter trees that they've cut. And these are, kind of forest edge type trees. And they keep them near the river somewhere. They always know where they are. It's amazing. So the boat's beached. They get a couple people, and I've been lucky enough to help out with this a few times, because you got to make sure you get in there and help out. And they sort of tilt the boat, and they stick some of these big trees under it. And then you move around, you push the boat onto it, and then there's just this stage of moving this boat on these branches on sand, sometimes 30, 40, 50 feet till you get into the river. And this one time it was so badly beached, we actually had to get a winch as well. So we have a winch, and we have like multiple people with tree limbs, and it's just the most jungle thing in the world. I mean, I kind of about a month into being here, I kind of coined a phrase, which is just #Amazon. Because there's things that happen, you're just like, this could never happen anywhere except for maybe Asia and Africa in a similar environment. But you got to be in the tropics, where it's not only because they may not have the actual financial resources to buy equipment, but it's also that things just wear out and break here anyways, that they usually find a way to use something natural to fix a problem. And it's the ingenuity is just mind-numbing. It's just absolutely so impressive. It's great. It's one of the most enjoyable parts. Obviously, the animals are the most enjoyable part, but outside of the animals, just watching how people survive here is just one of the most enjoyable things for sure.
So, what have been your #Amazon experiences? Like, what is? Tell us the story.
Well, there's quite a few. I mean, I think we'd run out of time if I told you them all, but I think I'll tell you the one that is the most famous, people who know me. So yeah, this is about a month into me being here as a worker. And I mentioned that we got lucky enough to see 2 jaguars. So we decided to take a day off from research, and we decided to take a boat, upriver to a mammal clay lick. It was just kind of a group. There was about 8 of us in a boat driving along, no big deal. And suddenly on the one side of the bank, we noticed a jaguar walking, and it's like, oh my God, it's so exciting. And she's making noise. She's kind of like almost like caterwauling. So we're pretty sure she's in heat because, jags don't vocalize unless they're in heat like that. It's the time of the year, right time for them. It was the end of the dry season, perfect timing. So we're like really enamored looking at her, super cool. And then somebody notices on the other side of the bank, there's another jaguar. And this is a male jaguar, and he's very interested in her. He doesn't care about us. He's very interested in her. So he decides to jump in the river and begin swimming across the river to try to get to her. But he's about halfway there, and he's sort of, you could almost watch it in his eyes. They're good swimmers. Jaguars are very good swimmers. But you could tell he's like, this current is a lot stronger than I anticipated. This is not worth the effort. So he literally turned around. And as he was turning around, we decided, we're all just so shocked. The motor's off in the boat. We're just drifting toward the bank. And luckily enough for us, we drift right to the bank where he's going. So literally we're like pulling up toward him as he's going to the rocks. And he gets out and he shakes. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. The water from him shaking hit the boat. And then he actually ran down and ran at the boat because of the way the beach was, and then up into the edge of the forest. And then he sat down in the bush, and we could see him looking frustrated because he couldn't get to her, right? So I mean, that was an amazing experience. There's no question. I was lucky enough to see a jaguar at night, actually, the very first time I was here. But this was a better view because obviously it's daylight. So we were all excited. We kept going. We actually get to the clay lake. We start walking, and this clay lake, it's very far. It's about a 3 kilometer, maybe 4 kilometer walk. Takes a while. It takes a good hour at least to get there. So maybe an hour and a half. So we start early on the trail, and I felt something in my eye, like a little burning sensation, and I thought it was just sweat. No big deal. Half an hour goes on, and the eye's really burning a lot. And I asked a friend who was with me. I was like, "Do you have anything I can splash in my eye?" And he gave me something, and it didn't help. And about a half an hour later, my eye is just on fire. It's red. It's swollen. Like I'm hours away from the city. I mean, even if we got in the boat, I'd probably be 4 hours till we got back. And I realized my eye is just like gonna explode with the pain and the swelling. So the person I mentioned, Cheeky, who again we all know he knows everything. So I asked, because my Spanish at the time is still not perfect, but at the time it was not good at all. I asked my friend, can you ask Cheeky what it is, like how help, like, because I knew Cheeky would know. So my friend Luke, he asked Cheeky, and Cheeky, of course, is like always smiling. This guy is never not smiling. And he's like, oh yeah, see, that definitely he knows. So Luke turns to me, and I will never forget the look in his face. And he's a really good friend of mine. And he just has this look like, Chris, Cheeky says you need to pee in your eye. And I'm like, listen, that's not that bad. Come on now. So I give it like another 10 minutes, and I'm like, okay, I got no choice here. So I'm like, Luke, turn around. And I, not to be graphic, but cup and splash, if you can imagine what that means. And yeah. And the funny thing is like the minute it hits my eye, aside from how gross it was, yes, and warm, obviously, it honestly did help. Like the swelling, you could just feel it get better immediately. I did have to do it one more time. And then it was amazing. And then we got back to, I kept going because at that point, well, like, what are you going to do? Just stay with it. And it was getting better. So we came back before we got in the boat, and Cheeky, again, amazing. He's like, okay, come with me. He finds grass, and he actually, almost like aloe vera, he breaks the grass off, and he actually rubs the liquid from the grass in my eye. And that actually makes my eye start to water, which cleans out all of the, well, you know what. And I swear, by the next day, you would never have known I almost lost my eye. So it's actually a type of, I don't know the exact scientific name. I'm not an entomologist. So, one of your listeners can tell me exactly the species or genus, but basically it's a small type of wasp that has a liquid venom. And, if this gets in your eye and it's not treated, it will cause blindness. So basically Cheeky saved my eye.
Wow.
And to me, that's it. Like, that's the jungle. You see 2 jaguars, and an hour and a half later, you're peeing in your eye. If that doesn't summarize the jungle, I don't know what does. The crazy things you can see and the crazy things you do as part of just everyday life. So yeah, I think of all the stories, and there's so many, but I think of all the stories, it's probably the best one I can think of for sure.
Man, that's a story.
Yeah, it was in hindsight, it's cool. At the time it was painful, but right now it's a pretty cool story to tell.
For sure. Especially with time between you peeing in your eye and you telling the story.
Yes, yeah. It's not like it's fresh, it's been a couple years, so it's good. It's good.
Well, I think that I know that you work with bats.
Well, I'm curious about the other kind of animals that you got.
Oh, please go ahead.
Sorry,
Andy.
can you? Yeah, but
Oh, I was going to ask the same question you were. See, yeah, I know that working with bats, I definitely had a lot of experience with people being freaking out if bats even like smack you, like just their spit is going to be something that you really have to worry about. What other kind of animals have you kind of witnessed that you've really had to watch out for?
I mean, the truth is, I mean, so it's actually kind of funny. So we whenever we have an intern or volunteer, or I mean, even a tourist, obviously, we have like a health and safety, PowerPoint that we go over. And I quite enjoy it because basically I kind of say, these are all the things that'll kill you. I guess I introduce it and saying, this is everything that will kill you if you're stupid. It's kind of how I preface the talk, right? I have a lot of fun with it. There are things that are dangerous here. Of course there are. But honestly, it's not nearly as dangerous as people would think, as long as you understand, what is dangerous, right? And I guess what I mean by that is like, no matter how much you do a talk, if you walk around in Africa in the middle of the night, you're probably going to get eaten. There's a decent chance. It doesn't matter what a leopard or a lion or even a hippo charging could still kill you. Knowledge won't save you, right? But India, a tiger and a leopard might kill you. It doesn't matter if you know them really well. But down here, most of the stuff, if you know it and you respect it and you know how to interact with it, it's pretty safe. So I mean, I guess probably for me, the most dangerous thing that I work with on a regular basis, just purely dangerous, are the venomous snakes, obviously. Catching them and handling them. There's situations where we try to do everything we can to minimize the risk, but obviously, you're still talking about vipers that, could cause death if you don't, if you don't get anti-venom, and even if you do, if you're bitten in the right place, they could cause death for sure. So that's probably the most dangerous animal that I would have to handle. Another one that's kind of, more dangerous than people think is the wandering spider. I mean, all the big spiders we have down here, the wandering spider is the one that, it has caused a few deaths and it could be dangerous. But again, I talk about a venomous snake, and, I'm sure a lot of your listeners really like snakes because that's why they're listening to this podcast, but there might be a few people who don't know them or kind of scared of them. And actually today is a World Snake Day. It's a good time to talk about snakes as it is. They're not aggressive animals. They don't want to attack you. There is a legend down here, speaking of, sort of like historical things. And it's not just I think it's most of Latin America, that the Bushmaster, Sheshupe, as they're called down here, people will swear to God, and it does, even some of the biologists, which amazes me, will swear to you that they chase you when they see you, that they will chase you down a trail. And it's the funniest. I can hear you laughing, see, and it's the most hilarious thing, but everybody believes it. And it's this, it sounds funny at first, and it sounds like a great way to scare kids so they're careful about snakes. But the problem is it results in them being killed, usually on site. And I have a story that I'll just give you an example of that. So I know, obviously, you know quite a few people in this area now, and one of the girls I know, she works, she's like a biologist at a lodge near one of our sites, and she loves everything, including obviously snakes. And she was out with a friend of hers looking and GPSing the location of trees. And she had a guide, she had one of these, again, older men who just know it. I don't know how, but like spiritually, they know where these trees are, It's amazing how they know it. So he's out there finding these castagna trees, and they find a bushmaster. It's beautiful. And she's like so excited. Her friend's excited. He's like, yeah, it's really good. And then he just looks at her, the shedding in the air, like I'm supposed to kill it, right? Like he doesn't even hesitate. He's just like, yeah, it's cool. Now I kill it, right? It's just so automatic. And again, I'm not saying that he's a bad person for that, but it just shows you how ingrained it is in the culture. And, that might seem like, well, killing one snake, what is it? Well, it does matter because these guys, they have big territories and live a long time. So you kill a big adult bushmaster, I mean, you may not see one in that area for a long time. This is not that you should kill any snake, obviously, but, one garter snake somewhere in New York or Ontario in Canada is not going to wipe the population out. Don't do it. Please don't kill snakes. But you know what I mean? Something like a bushmaster, it's a big impact on the population. And sadly, that is, you see, myself, I've done a lot of herpetological monitoring around close to human habitation, like communities and areas where there's been logging. And you just see the diversity of snakes, and especially venomous snakes, just plummets. And then you get to areas where there's more protected, and suddenly, oh wow, there's more snakes here. Shocking, because nobody's killing them. So it is a really real shame. And we try our best to educate the local people and show them that, just leave it alone. Like the ones I've encountered are just really chill. Even the fer-de-lance, which is, probably the most, there's quite a few species of fer-de-lance, but it's probably it causes the most bites in Latin America of any venomous snake. And it's got a reputation for being aggressive. And, when you handle it, it is quite aggressive in the hands. But I mean, I actually stepped almost on the tail of one once, and still it was just trying to get away from me. Like, they don't want to just jump in your face and attack you. So yeah, I mean, I'd probably the venomous snakes are the most dangerous, but again, if you know what you're doing and you're careful and respect them, they're not really a threat. You have to ask for it, so to speak, in what you do and how you interact with them.
One of my favorite examples of that sort of thing down in your part of the world is that you have both vampire bats and false vampire bats, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
And the false vampires are something that I've seen on the wing a couple times, but I've never gotten to see in the hand. And
yeah,
I'm curious.
They are big. Yeah.
Have you dealt with Vampirum spectrum or?
So yeah, Vampirum spectrum is the only one I have not yet gotten. All the other big false vampire bats. There's some other really big ones. We've caught them all, and they are very big and very powerful. But that particular one is quite rare. We have not encountered it yet, but I've encountered, like I said, all the other big species. And I had one species, which is Phallostoma cystatus, and my memory clicked in. So many names to remember, but yeah, Phallostoma cystatus. And it can actually be almost as big by weight as a Rhetus. And this one particular one I handled was 118 grams, which, to give you context, the average, like a little brown bat, is about 7 grams, maybe 8 grams, So 118 grams is a big bat. It is not as big as a flying fox, because of course those are like a different suborder in Asia and Africa. But in the Americas, by weight, the Phallostoma cystatus is the second biggest bat by weight in the Americas. And actually, I'm usually very careful, but you handle animals enough, mistakes will happen. And I was actually slightly distracted because I had about 30 students watching me handle it. And I think I turned my head for a split second to answer a question. And this bat just managed to nail my thumb. And just ripped my thumb to shreds. It was so bad. But again, it's not the bat's fault. It's just upset because I'm holding it, and we didn't hold it long and let it go. But it's got a heck of a bite. And it's so true what you say. That's a 118 gram bat, and it's it eats insects, it lifts the odd vertebrate, some fruit here and there. It's definitely not a vampire bat. Whereas vampire bats are so small and delicate, and it's amazing how the myths go about the sizes and which one is which, right? A lot of people wouldn't know the difference between the two. They'd assume the bigger one is probably the vampire bat.
Right. Well, handily enough, we have a review this month on a bat detector done by Donald Solik. So let me jump to that right now.
Hello, fellow naturalists. I'm Donald.
And I'm Zaylee.
And we love bats.
Dad.
What?
Your mask.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. So bats are pretty great, and they're everywhere. But bats can be extremely hard to find, observe, and identify on the wing, which is why we are doing a product review of the Echometer Touch. This is a device that you can plug into your smartphone or tablet and transform it into a bat detector. The orange attachment there is actually an ultrasonic microphone which can detect high-frequency sounds like bat echolocation. A free app called Echometer then displays bat calls, translates the sounds to frequencies that we can hear, and contains software that attempts to identify bat calls as species. You can then see a photo of your species and follow a link to its Wikipedia page to learn more about it. This is our friend Mark.
Last week we were sitting here on the deck, and it was in the evening, and we saw a large number of bats flying around that we hadn't seen before, and we were curious about what they were, and we invited our friend Donald over to help identify them for us.
Before we get started, we need to select our species classifier. The Ecometer app comes with classifiers for bats of North America, Europe and the UK, the Neotropics, and South Africa. We will select North America and then Colorado. Here the red check marks indicate which species are likely to occur in Colorado. I am going to manually deselect a few that I know don't occur here. And now when the software attempts a species ID, it will only consider one of these remaining checked species.
Here comes one.
You see it?
Here comes two.
Oh yeah, there they are.
Here comes one, right there. That's cool. Does it say what kind of bat that is?
Mm-hmm. It says, yeah, it's a big brown bat.
Oh, wow.
You can
Oh,
put
look
a
at the
little
picture
eye
of
in
it.
the corner.
Wow. The big ears and shiny eyes.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So cute.
Another feature of the Ecometer is it records the locations of each call. We counted about 40 big brown bats flying from west to east along a greenway behind Mark's house, which makes you think these are females leaving a nearby maternity colony. Mark tells me there are abandoned buildings not far to the west where these bats may be roosting, and they appear to be flying past Mark's house on their way to the ponds and forests of the Environmental Learning Center located to the east. So this GPS feature now gives us a much better picture of what is happening with Mark's bats. So there you have it, the Ecometer Touch. So this device is available from Wildlife Acoustics for $180. Now that might seem a bit pricey to an 11-year-old, but this makes it the most affordable bat detector on the market. Now, I personally wouldn't use this for professional bat surveys, but we think this is a great device for naturalists and educators to introduce people to bats and get them excited about these amazing animals.
It's also good for people who are wondering what's outside your front door.
So, Chris, I've read a lot about the eco lodges in the area, and you just talked to us about how they actually have been phasing out during this COVID crisis. And yeah, that is concerning for me as well, because I've been looking in Borneo to try to see if I can help in any way for the eco lodges out there. But what's kind of the next step for what you guys can look forward to, and what's your next goal for moving forward after kind of stopping things like this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, as I kind of alluded to, it's definitely a big problem with conservation now, with the fact that the eco lodges are closed up right now, and a lot of the other NGOs, such as ourselves and other NGOs across the whole world are not able to be operational. And not only are they losing the research, but they're also losing the conservation and the impact that has on the environment. So that's definitely a problem right now, for sure. And we hope that tourism is able to return in the relative near future to this area. In terms of what our plans are, I mean, so there's sort of our initial plan is to sort of return to the normal work that we do, which is sort of monitoring and overviewing the species in this region. So we work with the lodges, with a lot of eco lodges, in two ways. One is to sort of give a baseline of what biodiversity is sort of on their property. If you think of the average eco lodge, they probably like nature and they want to have a business that protects it, but they're not really probably biologists. They might know they've seen this or they've seen that, but they have no idea of the true baseline of all the species there, the actual inventory. And they wouldn't have any idea of the actual how common these animals actually are on their property. So we can come in and give them that baseline data, which is really important. And another way that we can help them is that a lot of these eco lodges actually have ecotourism concessions from the government. And to allow these concessions to exist, they have to provide pretty detailed reports to the government about what is on the property and how they're conserving it. So we partner with them to give them that sort of biology resource and research resource, so to speak. So that's how we work with a lot of landowners and eco lodges. And we also work with the government because, again, even though the government has their own rangers and they have some of their own biologists, it's a huge area, obviously. And a lot of the biologists may not have the specialty to evaluate the bird community or the bats or, I mean, the reptiles and amphibians. So we work with the government a lot to give them a sort of regular reports about how, for example, the Tambopata National Reserve is actually working to protect animals. Like, is it working? The answer, the Cliff Notes version is yes, it is working, because if you look at the diversity of animals on the reserve side of the river compared to the other side of the river, and this is something we've been analyzing recently, it is having an impact. The density and the diversity is definitely better on the reserve side, which is not surprising, but you need to have some way to prove that. You need the research to show that, right? So, I mean, for us, in terms of the near future, the next few months, we do have some projects coming up, but I mean, I think we want to get back to that monitoring, get back to the actual protection of the environment that we're working in. And then, I mean, as an organization, one of the things we'd really like to do in the future is start to use, more technology down here in the monitoring of animals. There's still species to be discovered, and there's still ranges for these species to be discovered, no question at all. But one of the things we're really lacking for so many animals is just basics about how big is their territory. Something as simple as, how big is this owl? How big is its normal territory? Or a bat, how big is its territory? There's a lot of data that we're lacking. What we do have in some species is, some estimates based on transects and acoustic or visual monitoring, and those are something, but they haven't used. Very rarely has telemetry been used in this area with so many species, and it's actually quite remarkable how often you go online or read a book or ask an expert fellow biologist, like, how big is their territory? Do you know? And people are just like, don't know. I can guess, but I really don't know. I have no idea. And, how can you really develop effective conservation or rehabilitation plans if you don't know how big a territory an animal needs, but also what in the territory is necessary for it to exist? And these are really big questions, which we've known probably for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in North America and Europe about most animals there. We don't know about so many animals in this region. And for us, we really want to branch into that. And there's some really exciting technology out there now that, just coming sort of the edge of a lot of technology that will allow us to research it. But the issue for us is often budget, to be honest. And also the expertise. I mean, I've recently put out the call to anybody who has, experience actually designing telemetry from scratch. We'd really like to partner with someone who has that expertise to implement some new technology in this region. Because, if we can open that door to learn more about species, territory size and habitat requirements, that's the next level of research in not just the neotropics, but honestly, Asia and Africa as well. I mean, that really is next level. And that's really what we're hoping to do. And we have some grants put out, and we talked to people, but, if any of your listeners have any information they want to share or want to touch base with me, I would certainly be happy to talk to them about that subject.
Well, that is a good point to ask. So if people want to follow you, your work, and your organization, where's the best place to do that?
So we're pretty active on social media. So, I mean, you can obviously look us up. The organization on the web, it's just faunaforever.org. Pretty straightforward, Fauna Forever, like it sounds. And you can find us on Facebook, the organization, and on Instagram. Pretty straightforward to if you want to contact me, I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook because my last name's kind of strange. So it's just Chris Ketola on Facebook, and same on Instagram.
Anthony, if people wanted to follow you, where can you be found?
Oh man, yeah. My Instagram is going to be Outdoor Anthony. That's it. That's all it is. And then, yeah, I do post quite a few things through Facebook and Instagram. That's usually where I hit things hard. But yeah, I'm just traveling. I'm going to start moving around. I'll probably be visiting Flagstaff. And so I'll be going to Arizona and California within the next month here.
All right. That's great. And I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking with us about your experiences in the Peruvian Amazon, the conservation needs, and your particular needs as an organization. It's been great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I had a blast talking to you guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Two last things for our listeners. If you're not deafened by my cat yowling. But we've got two things going on still. One is the Naturalist photo competition. So that's Instagram or Facebook hashtag Naturalist Images 1 if you want to enter the competition with any images, and there are posts all about that on the webpage and the Facebook page. And also there's an event coming up. So the 3rd through 6th of August is the International Biodiversity Championships.
All right.
And so the team call has been put out. Teams of 2 to 5 people anywhere in the world can enter the International Biodiversity Championships at the same time as the Ecological Society of America is meeting. So it is it's an opportunity to show off what is going on outside of your front door, and we hope you take advantage of it. Thank you, gentlemen, for talking with us, and we'll see you next time.